My name's Phil Bauer. I've got Chad Plattner here with me, and we're going to try to give you a fairly quick overview of the 2020 system. If anybody in the crowd was running 2020 this last year? Got one or two? Okay, excellent. Okay, what we have up here, and I'm going to turn this off just for a second, is we have tried to simulate an 8-row corn planter. And we wrestled with what are we going to do? We can't bring it inside. How are we going to do the seeds and get the seeds back up through the seed tubes? And what we came up with was this contraption. And it's 3 spinning discs. We've got 3 wooden discs with metal spikes sticking out of the ends radially. There's 50 spikes on each disc. The discs turn, and they turn past seed tube sensors. So we've installed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 seed tubes. We've got our 8 rows. This disc is spinning by those eyes, and so just as if a seed is dropping through the seed tube and it breaks the beam of the sensor and you get a pulse saying seed, the same thing's happening here. We're spinning a disc, the metal spike goes past the seed tube sensor, you get a pulse. As far as the sensor is concerned, it's looking at corn falling through the seed tube. You can kind of think of this as this is your one wing of your planter. You got a center section here with rows 4 and 5, and then you've got the right half of the planter, the right section, with rows 6, 7, and 8. These 8 sensors are tied into these monitors. So we've got a Kinsey KPM2, we've got the Precision 2020, John Deere Green Star, and a CompuTrack 250 monitor. We'd like to show a comparison of what you see with the population monitor and what you don't see with the population monitor. So Chad, if you could come up here, we're going to take a look at the Kinsey here. So I can control the motor speed on these. So you kind of think of these wheels turning as like your meter spinning, and I can control the speed of that hex shaft with a little motor here. And we've set it up to populate close to 32,000. So we're going to say we're planting corn at 32,000. If I can maybe, if you guys can see this. The monitor's saying he's populating at 32,100, so we're real close to right what we want to populate. At the top of the KPM, it's got a stack of bars that go up to 100% or a little more for each row. So we see 8 rows, and every row is populating at 100%. So looks pretty good. Would we agree at that? That as far as we can tell, population is right on. Every row is consistent. I'd say let's go ahead and plant. But before we do that, let's take a look at the CompuTrack. Let's see what it would tell us. So again, this is like putting 4 monitors on your planter and just kind of getting a feel for what each one's going to show you. So look at the CompuTrack, and it tells us that we're average about 32,000. That's beautiful. Our maximum is about 32,400. And our minimum is about 31,600. So we're varying about 400 seeds from the average. Pretty good. Would you guys go ahead and plant? Yeah? Heads are shaking yes? Okay, fantastic. Let's take a look at the Green Star 1. Okay, so here Green Star is actually showing us, again, a variation per row, but they're actually showing us. We've got a little fluctuation. Our average is 32,200. Looks pretty good. A few rows are below, a few rows are above. They're fluctuating, a couple hundred seeds. Does that look good? Heads are shaking yes? Yeah, I think all of us would say, yeah. Let out the clutch and let's go plant. Well, as I said before, that's a very good indication of population. But population is just one piece of the story. So I'm now going to show you what 2020 will show you on that very same planter with those very same sensors. So I'm going to go to the home screen. If you look up here, 2020 claims that you're losing somewhere around $18 an acre because of the way this planter is configured and the way those meters are running. And that's $18 that you would have a very difficult time finding with a traditional population monitor. So let's just kind of walk through it. If you look at the upper left, 2020 is showing you population. Pretty similar to what we were showing before. We're about 32.1, 32.2. We got a low row, we got a high row, variations, a couple hundred seeds. We can do things like I can push on that population button. So I'm just going to tap it, and it's going to give me a bar chart similar to the green star. You can see we're getting some variation in population. I'm going to hit the back button. But what's concerning me is the singulation. So this is saying singulation of 97.2%, and that's pretty bad, especially if this was an ESET machine. Our experience last year with the guys who were running 2020 was that across the board, they were running right at around 99.5% singulation, between 99.4 and 99.6. So 97.2 isn't a very good number these days. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to touch that singulation button and see if I can get some more detail. Okay, so it brings me onto a row, or to a screen that shows me individual rows. So I'm looking at rows 1 through 8. I'm showing that you maybe can't read this clear back there, but it says 2% skips here and 2% multiples above. So what this is showing me is that on rows 1, 2, and 3, I'm skipping a consistent 2%. So 2% of the seeds I'm trying to plant aren't being planted. And if I look here on my wheel, those 3 rows are on this right wing, or the left wing here, on rows 1, 2, and 3. So I want more information. And again, 2020 is built, so if you want more information, you touch it. So I'm going to go ahead and press this middle bar on row 2. Okay, so here we've got the details on row 2. I can see he's populating right around 32,000. He's singulating at 98%. And we can see specifically we're getting 2 skips, no multiples, but 2% skips. I can see my smooth ride. I can see my vacuum. We don't have the vacuum hooked up right here, but if it was, you would see it. Downforce is something we'll discuss in the next session, so I'm just going to leave that for now. But I look at my live seeds. This is a graphical picture of every single seed that's going through that seed tube. We're literally seeing every seed, and we're showing it here. And what we're showing is this red X, that every 50 or so seeds, I'm getting a skip. And here he comes. And what I'm going to tell you now is that I really didn't put 50 spikes in this disc. Before you guys came in here, I pulled one of those spikes out. So we've got 49 nicely spaced spikes and 1 hole. And that's simulating a skip. That's a time when the meter didn't drop a seed. 2020 is picking that up. It's difficult to see that on a population monitor. And just as a kind of a fun exercise here, if you look at this wheel, we've marked on it where that skip is. It's got a little red X. So as the wheel comes around, I'm going to watch sensor 2 here, and all I'll tell you is that skip goes past the sensor, and you see if you can track it on the screen here. So here we are. It's coming out the back of the planter. It's coming around. So here we go. Skip. There it is. Skip. There it is. Skip. There it is. So she's skipping. She comes out back behind those closing wheels, and you see it. It's even to the point where, if I can be so bold, I'm going to hit this little stop button up here. So you kind of have like a DVD forward, back, stop, play. And had I put the clutch in on the tractor at that spot and stopped and went back and looked around 12, 13 feet and dug in the dirt, I'd have found that skip. If you had seed with you in the cab, you could have taken a kernel out and you could have put it in and filled that in. Okay, so yeah, at the price of corn, I think you'd want to do that. So I'm going to take us back here to the singulation page. So now we're looking at the details of what the singulation is like on every row. Now, just as a note, with these buttons on the side, I can scroll up and down, and I can look and say, what's my population look like on every row? Or I can say, what's my economic loss? And we haven't talked about that yet, but how much money am I losing because of these skips and these doubles and these misplaced seeds on every row? I can look at vacuum, which at this point we don't have hooked up, right? Downforce, same thing. Your spacing. How's my spacing look on individual rows? Ride quality, smoothness of ride, and so forth. But singulation's bothering me. I look at rows 4 and 5, and I can see I'm doubling and I'm skipping around 4% each. So 8% of the time, I've got a singulation issue. So I don't like that. I want to know what's going on. I'm going to touch row 5. I'm just going to touch the bar here on row 5. And it's going to take me to the row 5 details page. So again, I see my population and it's a little high. I see my singulation, 92%. And here's what's the reason. It's skipping 4.2, and it's doubling 4%. And not only that, I look and I see my seed placement. And that's saying that I'm for seeds that I've singulated correctly, which means the meter dropped me a seed. How close is that seed to his neighbor? And specifically, is he close enough to his neighbor that he's actually going to not put on a full ear? And so agronomically, we know that somewhere in the 4-inch range is where you start having the potential to have less than a full ear. So if that seed is 4 inches or closer to his neighbor, we're going to flag him as what we call a misplaced seed. And as you see here across the bottom, you've got your skips. These reds are a double, where we actually singulated 2 seeds. And the yellows are a misplaced. It says he was singulated correctly, but he's too close to his neighbor. So I look at this, and I can tell that if I were running this bad on every row, I'd be losing $50 an acre. That's some serious cash. And just as a side note, the parameters are configurable. We're not trying to tell you what a skip is worth or what a double is worth. We know agronomically that a skip is going to cost you somewhere around 0.8 of an ear, a double somewhere around 0.4. But all that's configurable. You put in the price of corn, you put in what you're comfortable with. We'll give you defaults and you can do what you want with it. But it's an idea that we really ought to take some action here. And as a reminder, your population monitor isn't going to be able to give you this kind of information, as we've seen already. Okay, what I've done here, I'm sure you've figured it out by now. On rows 4 and 5, if I go back, on rows 4 and 5, I took that disc and I pulled out 2 of the spikes to create 2 skips. I took 2 of those spikes and I actually welded another one right next to it. So as it goes past that sensor, it goes bing, bing, just like ding, ding, like 2 seeds were dropping. And we're picking that up as a double. And then some of those spikes, I bent them. So they're a long ways away from the one neighbor and they're too close to the other neighbor. Just like a seed that's coming down that seed tube, too close or too far away from the previous seed. All right, I hit the home button and I took us back to this main page. And on the main page, you can see we're showing you your speed. We're showing you on a planter average, I'm skipping about 1.8% on the average across all rows. Now, we know, because we've looked into all these details, that really I'm skipping 2% on this wing. I'm actually skipping 4% on this wing. And this wing is just happy. He's just humming along, no defects at all. On the average, I'm about 1.8%. Same with doubles. Got an acres counter. I can change that to acres A, acres B. You can use that however you want. You can reset it. In fact, if you want to, you can go in and you can turn that into a vacuum gauge. If you've got 2 blowers, you have two vacuum sensors, it'll show them both. It'll show your right and your left hand. So I'm going to go ahead and put that back to my acres counter. Good ride. We talked about that this morning. I'll just touch on it briefly. Back on the row unit, we mount just a little black box we call the row unit module, or we kind of call it the RUM, R-U-M for short. And this guy has got an accelerometer in it, which just measures the up and down bounce. So as that row unit is going up and down, you're going to see your good ride change. And we showed that this morning on our little bull simulator back here. But that's a really good indicator when your ride's too rough. But what it helps you is when your spacing is off and you're trying to figure out why your spacing isn't right. And you're saying, is it in my meter? Is it in my seed tubes? Is it just because I'm bouncing too much? So, if your ride is 60% and your spacing is 85%, you're going to want to slow down. Or maybe next year you're going to want to have a little bit different tillage practice. Loss per acre, we talked about. That's taking the number of skips, the number of doubles, the number of seeds that are within 4 inches, and the number of seeds that are within 2.5 inches, which is even more severe. You're going to lose probably closer to 0.2 of an ear when you get seeds that close. and it's just coming up with a number, just a reference. And a lot of guys really liked that this last year, that they kind of use that as a gauge, as they'd try to go a half mile an hour faster. And you'd see if your spacing falls off, and you'd look and you'd say, no, spacing's good, my ride's good, I'm singulating fine, I'm gonna go half mile faster. And now my singulation starts falling off, and my spacing gets worse. And so you back it up, and you can kind of tune it in, and this is just an overall indicator of how you're doing. Guys like to see this green and say good. Obviously, in this case, we're quite a bit above that. Spacing, we've talked about. Again, anything you want to know on 2020, you just touch. So I want to know more about my spacing. I touch it, and I can see that rows 1, 2, and 3, spacing's great. Rows 4 and 5, I've got more than 5%. More than 5% of my seeds on those rows are spaced too closely, that I'm going to start taking an economic hit. Rows 6, 7, and 8 are fine. So what I'm going to do now is we've built this system. You've got a hex shaft in the back with some 90-degree gears that are driving these 3 wheels, all at the same speed. But we've inserted some dogs, kind of like what you have on your deer planters, between the wings and the main section. So I can actually take those dogs and misalign them. So you get the shafts a little bit out of line. And the result is the guy on the outside of that linkage is going to start rotating unevenly. He's going to go fast, slow, fast, slow. And I would venture to guess that many of you have probably seen that on your planters. You go home tonight and you check, and odds are reasonable that you're going to be out of line by an eighth or a quarter or even as much as a half inch. So I'm going to go ahead and misalign this guy. And we actually had this happen on a couple growers this last year. In fact, one grower had a brand new planter, and we came out and we put 20/20 on it, and right away we noticed his spacing on a couple rows was not what he would expect. And he looked a little closer, and those were rows on one wing. And they went back, and he was out of a line by 3/8 to a half, I believe. It was almost a half inch out of alignment. And 20/20 picks it right up. All right, so if we go to those rows now, and make sure I got that done right. So to go to those rows, I look here and I can see rows 6, 7, and 8, the spacing is going to pot. I'm going to go ahead and touch on row 8, for instance. So here we go, and we look behind the planter, and we see this section where that wheel is slowing down and speeding up, where I'm getting a bunch of misplaced seeds. I'm even getting skips because it's going so slow. And I start realigning my shaft, and I start dialing that in, and we're going to see the number of those misplaced seeds goes down. It goes down. My seed placement is getting better and better. And eventually I'm back in line, and it's not an issue. So it's just one more thing that we're not accustomed to being able to see that kind of information. But a tremendous amount of those kinds of defects that a tool like 20/20 can show you. I had a grower last year in Iowa who had a nice planter. He had the precision meters. He was tuned and ready to go. He started planting, and he noticed that one of his rows, so he's looking at the dashboard here, and he notices that one of his rows in singulation and spacing turns yellow. See how this guy's yellow? That means that overall my spacing's good, but I've got a real problem on row 4. So I say, wow, I don't know what's going on there. What do you do with 20/20? You touch it. So I'm going to touch this guy. That takes me to the details of that row. So he noticed on that one row, his singulation and his spacing was lousy. Everything else was fine. He goes back, he looks at the meter, can't find anything. He eventually lifts it up, and he had a piece of bean stubble stuck across the seed tube. So the meter was actually singulating correctly. It was dropping the seeds, but it was hitting that stubble and was bouncing like crazy, and it was so much to the fact that he had a train wreck on the ground below him, and 20/20 was warning him. Pulled the stubble out, put the meter back down, planted, beautiful. He was very thankful he caught that on the first day, and not 10 days later when the corn came up.